You, like I said, you pastored middle school and high school students for like 5-6 years, something like that, and then now you and Nicole oversee our young adult community, which is basically 20-year-olds, 18 to 30. What would be the biggest difference, right? Like, especially, I'm thinking of maybe someone who's like a junior or senior in here. What would be the biggest difference in terms of what those different demographics face, like the challenges that they face? Are they similar? Are they different? Biggest difference between maybe a high school student and a young adult's challenges, difficulties, struggles?
I mean, I think that there are some real similarities where a lot of you guys are focused on like trying to find some of the like significant relationships in the sense of like true friendships. Some of you might be getting interested in like trying to start like a relationship with the opposite sex and all that. That there's some similarities there because we talk a lot about relationships in young adults because that is one of the main things that is on the mind of someone in young adulthood. Might be the main thing that's on some of your minds in here. Just keep looking forward, guys. You're okay. But I think some of the things that I notice is a lot of it comes down to like identity. I think, in our teen years, in our young adult years, identity is such a big topic, and when we're maybe more in like junior high, high school, I think we're trying to like find where we fit. Like we're trying to find like where we belong. And even maybe like who we belong to, like some of the groups and things. Like, I don't know if this is true of you guys, but when I was like your age, I feel like every single school year, I kind of showed up to that year and I had like a whole new appearance, like a whole new look, like a whole new fit. Like for some of you who have been here for a little bit, maybe some of the leaders can attest to the fact that it's like, oh, okay, like you're coming this year and this is the look, like this is the fit. But I feel like for me, it was this thing of just each year I was trying to discover like, okay, who am I? What do I belong to? Who do I belong to? I feel like in our teen years, there can be that quest for like figuring out some things about identity. Move to young adult years, and I think, we could still be trying to figure out where we belong. But I think more we're thinking, how am I significant? What's my purpose? Like, what am I trying to be about? What am I trying to do with my life, in this life? You start to feel some of those responsibilities of life come on. And so I think that those could be some of the differences, is maybe that quest for belonging versus that side of significance. Like, what's my significance?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, because I know I talk to people who are my age, and the pressure to, like be in the career that you want and to have the life that you want by the time you're like 25 is, it's pretty intense. But when it comes to this big green graphic that we have on the screen right here, the so what, we started a conversation a couple weeks ago around this idea of, okay, God is blank, so what? And we actually were going to call the series God Is, but I think sometimes we talk about God in church and we talk about, hey, this is who God is, this is what he's like, and we can still kind of walk out thinking, okay, but so what? Like, maybe we don't even mean it in a bad way, but more so like, all right, well, what does that actually have to do with me? Like, that's great that God is this thing and that thing, but so what? What does that actually have to do with me? And we started the series by talking about how God is just bigger than we can imagine, and how the way that we get to know him is by him inviting us into a relationship with him where we obey him and we follow people. Last week, Raylene and Nicole had a conversation around how God is love. And today, I actually want to have a conversation around God's anger, which sounds weird, and it's definitely not something that we talk about a lot in church. But I want to read one verse, and then we'll launch into this conversation. Exodus chapter 34. I think I remembered it. Yes, Exodus chapter 34. This is God talking to Moses. So God passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, "The Lord, Lord," if you remember, we talked about Yahweh a couple weeks ago, the compassionate and gracious God. That idea in Scripture kind of lines up with this idea that God is love, which is what we talked about last week. Slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. God's definition of himself right there to Moses, it goes on. But I want to zoom in on that phrase that God is slow to anger, because I think when we talk about God being angry, there are usually two big mistakes, or I should say two common mistakes that people make. The first mistake would be people who think that God is just way angrier than he actually is. This is going to be a little bit of a cheap shot, but just stay with me. I'm going to clarify it. Okay, sometimes you ever seen the people like with the signs on the side of the street, or like with the bright yellow signs, and it either says like repent or perish or turn or burn or whatever it is. Sometimes those people can come across like God's angrier than he actually is. And that is, I don't mean to make a general statement, because that's not how everybody who's holding a sign is. But sometimes people can act or think or talk as if God is just angry all the time, and he's just really upset, and you better get it together or else things are going to be bad. That's one mistake. Here's the other mistake when we talk about God's anger. It's people who want to totally ignore that subject and don't know how to understand this idea that God can get angry. We live in a society where kind of the highest virtue is like tolerance. The best thing a person can be is accepting and affirming, and it's just like, hey, as long as you're not hurting anybody, like do whatever you want to do. I don't have problems with anything. Everything's cool. And basically they can eliminate this idea that God actually has a way of life, that God actually created people to live a particular way, and that when somebody is not living that particular way, they would be in error. They would actually be wrong for that. And it's people who try to attempt to basically say, hey, there's no such thing as God being angry. And yet, the verse we just read said God is slow to anger. So, Pastor Sam, help us understand, what does it actually mean that God is slow to anger?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me such an easy question, an easy topic. How many of you guys, like, when you're like, what's your favorite virtue about God? You're like, his anger. Like, thank you. But when it comes down to this, it's interesting when you get into, like, the word itself, slow to anger. And, like, just to have a little fun, like, the language that the Bible's written in is more, like, visual than, like, English would be and stuff like that. And so when the Bible says God is slow to anger, what it actually means and what it actually is saying is that God is long of nostril. Like, that's the weirdest thing,
I
right?
saw several people make weird faces right now.
Yeah,
so
people are like, what? Like, but think about it. What happens when you get angry? And what happens specifically around this area of your face when people are like really angry, right? And so the Bible just is using that picture, to show us. But God is not that one who is just gonna like fly off the handle and just be all like angry, but he's the one who's, taking in that deep breath. He's I have some toddlers, and their tempers are really short. They are short of anger. They're quick of angry, but they're also really small. They have tiny nostrils, so it makes a lot of sense. But like God is this God who the Bible is saying is slow to anger. And the interesting thing, and what we need to point out today, like they talked about God's love last time we got together. And the important thing to know is that God's love is his eternal characteristic. It's his eternal attribute. When we're talking about God's anger, this is not like the eternal attribute of who God is. Like, it's not like God is anger. No, you can say God is love, but you can't say God is anger. But you can say God is slow to anger, because anger is not even a primary emotion. Anger is this secondary emotion that you and I feel. So if you are angry, how many of you are angry this morning? Just kidding. Like, if you are angry, it's usually because, some of you might be. I know what those drives over here could be like. But if you are angry, it's usually because there's other emotions going on that are fueling that anger. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, when you're angry, it's because you feel like rejected, or you feel like you were, mistreated, or you're misunderstood, or whatever, right? And there can be so many sources of our anger. Like, for me, I could be angry because, like, my pride was challenged or whatever. But when you think about, like, what is the source behind, like, God's anger? It's actually his love. It's actually those other things, like if you were to look at that passage that Pastor Anthony read, and it talks about his compassion, and it talks about his grace, it talks about his faithfulness, and the slow to anger being in the middle, it's the fact that, like, yeah, God gets angry, and yeah, God is slow to anger, but it's these eternal attributes around that are the source for the reasons why, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But what we need to know from the beginning when we're talking about God being slow to anger is the fact that, like, God's temper, if you will, is temporary. Like, it's not eternal. Like, God's not just up in heaven right now just pissed at the world. Just like up there like, man, I wish they would. I'm gonna send like a lightning bolt or whatever. Like, God is not just like up there huffing and puffing. No, his nostrils are bigger than that. Like, he's taking those deep breaths and he's under self-control. Like, God is slow to anger. His temper is temporary. It's not eternally who he is, right? But the other thing we could say is that it demonstrates to us, and what God being slow to anger says to us, is it says that God actually cares. Like, if God didn't get angry, then it would just mean he was indifferent. He was apathetic, that he doesn't care. Like, if you want a window into what someone cares about, you could ask, like, what angers them. Like, how many of you guys love your phones, your devices that you have? I mean, I saw you out in the lobby, so y'all are lying right now. Like we depend on these things. We all love them, right? We care a lot about our phone. Like, if you came in here today and you had the brand new iPhone, because Jesus uses iPhones. Like, if you guys came in here and you had an iPhone today that was brand new, and you dropped that thing out there in the lobby and the screen shattered, how many of you would be angry? Right? Why? Because you care about it. Like, when your parents want to discipline you, how many times do they take away that phone or take away those devices and stuff, right? And how many of you feel good about that? How many of you are angered by that, right? Why? Because you care about this. It's a window into what you care about. And I know that there are deeper and more real things that anger you guys, but it's a window into what you care about. And so when we talk about God getting angry, we will talk about today, but we have to talk about, like, what does God get angry at? Like, we know he's not this God who's just quick-tempered. It's like God is slow to anger, but him getting angry and him having anger, like, it demonstrates what he cares about. And the other thing that I'll say is that it also it shows that God is slow to anger because he's actually quick to forgive. God is slow to anger because he and who he is, in his nature of love and his nature of grace, like, God is more looking for the reason to forgive and the reason to give grace than he's looking for the reason to judge. He's looking for the reason to punish. Like, I like to say it this way, that God and who he is in his grace, like, he always gives space to people. Like, his grace gives us space, so he's slow in anger. Like, he's not just going to, fly off the handle and judge and punish and be this, ruler and tyrant in the sky that we all have to be fearful of. But no, he's love. And his love, it fuels sometimes what he gets angry about. But God being slow to anger is a great thing for us because it means that God is always going to operate with a self-control and a measured nature. And when he does get angry, when he does punish, the punishment's always going to fit the crime. It's not going to be like how we can be, where it's like we sometimes in our anger will do a lot more than what is deserved to another. That's not our God, and that's not how he is. Yeah, does that make sense?
I think I heard several yeses. I think differentiating between who God is, right? So we said last week, the verse says God is love. That's who he is. And then what God may display. So God is slow to anger, so he might display anger. I think it's a really important distinction. I forget the exact stat, but to my understanding, in the Old Testament, God is provoked to anger around 50 times. Around 50 times, the Bible basically says, hey, God, something got God angry. God is never, not one time, provoked to love. Yeah. Nothing has to get God to love. God just loves. That's who he is. And yet, he does, or he can, get angry. And then I think the distinction as well is like, well, what does he get angry about? Well, definitely things that are different than what you and I get angry about. If you had to think about the last time you were angry, it was probably because of something that happened to you. It was probably because of a restriction that was placed on you. Think about some of the fights that you get in with your parents, where, more often than not, the fights that you get into with your parents, you're not going to your mom or your dad and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're treating my sibling that way, and like, you're doing that to them. No, it has to do with us. How are you treating me? What are you trying to take away from me? What restrictions are you trying to put on me? Our anger is so oftentimes a result of how is somebody treating me. And yet for God, we actually see his anger displayed kind of like the analogy that Sam was giving. His anger is displayed on behalf of his children or on behalf of his creation. It's a lot more of a selfless kind of anger. And I think the obvious next question there is, okay, if God does get angry, what does he actually get angry about? And for me, I think one of the best practices is when I'm trying to understand something about God is I'll go read about Jesus, right? The Bible says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So it's like if you want to understand, all right, God, what do you like? How does this part of you actually look like in practice? You can go to Jesus and you can go to the first 4 books in your New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you can just read what did Jesus say? What did he do? What did he say when it came to this topic? So next question, what does Jesus actually get upset about? What gets him angry?
That's a good question. Things that Jesus gets angry at. One of the things I think about is that Jesus oftentimes got angry at the way that man-made religion would keep people from being able to just come into a relationship with God. So, for instance, like there would be times where the religious leaders would hold up all these different rules that would keep people from being able to experience, God through Jesus. So, for instance, Jesus heals a man on a day. It's on a Sabbath day, right? And so Jesus heals this man, and all the religious leaders are upset, and they actually want to find a way to come at Jesus and to accuse him and to try to even, kill him. And they're upset with Jesus because he violated a tradition. He violated this rule. And so Jesus is one of the things that totally angers Jesus is the way that man-made traditions and man-made rules can be placed in the way of people coming to God, of people coming to him and experiencing his grace and experiencing his love. I think about the fact that just Jesus gets angry at death itself. The fact that when his friend Lazarus, when he dies and Jesus goes to raise him from the grave, Jesus actually has a moment where the Bible says that he was angered. And it's because when God created us, he did not create us to experience death. That was not his original plan and design for us. And I don't think there's a human being on the planet that is not, angered by or upset with or wish that there was no such thing as death. Well, that comes from your God. That comes from the one who created you, that he himself does not like death. And so Jesus gets angered at death. Jesus gets angered at corruption. He gets angered at the injustices that he sees. And so, just to name a few, like those are some of the things I think of right off the bat. What are some things for you?
Well, I think it's that. I feel like the two implications there is right. So if God gets angry, if Jesus gets angry at something like corruption, if Jesus gets angry at something like when people make religion an obstacle to other people encountering God, I feel like in some respects that should be a little bit of a challenge for ourselves to go, hey, when do I or where do I do the things that Jesus would have got upset about? There's a whole chapter in Matthew 23 where Jesus just absolutely goes in on some religious leaders because of their hypocrisy, where he's like, you act so much better than you really are, and you basically close the door for other people connecting with God, and you portray yourself as if you're something that you're really not, and you actually got a bunch of stuff going on the inside. And I think the challenge for us is to go, okay, wait a second. If Jesus doesn't like that, do I do that? Is that an area of correction for my own life? But then I think the flip side of that is, when you talk about some of the things like death or corruption or injustice, where it's like certain things that you can just go on Instagram for 5 minutes and you're going to see a lot of. And I don't know about you, but like sometimes I get tired of seeing all of the horrible things that are going on in the world. Like literally, I'll see another video or another post or whatever it is, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. I don't even have energy to feel like bad for this thing because it's the 29th thing I've seen in the past 2 days. When I see stuff like that, to know, okay, I'm actually not the only one who's upset. I'm actually not the only one who's bothered. But like you said, I get that from God. I get that from the person who made me. And that I think that actually gives me a lot of hope, when it comes to how I handle the things that get me upset and angry today. I want to jump into the so what question. We're here and we're talking about how God can get angry. And if you showed up today, you probably didn't foresee that coming. And even as you hear us, you can be like, okay, well, wait a second. Like, so what? God gets angry. Okay, he gets angry at certain things. Don't get God angry, whatever. I don't know how you're connecting the dots in your head. The whole reason we're talking about who God is because at the end of the day, we are going to live our lives as a result of what we think God is like. If you walked in here this morning and you thought, man, God is just, he's really angry. He doesn't like me. He doesn't like my family. He doesn't like, certain things about my life or whatever it is, so I can't have anything to do with him. Like, the way you relate to God is going to be based on what you think about him. So when we start talking about God being slow to anger, one of the reasons we want to talk about it is because it's in the Bible, and we just want to talk about a full picture of who God is. But the other reason is to go, okay, if God is slow to anger, what does that actually have to do with me? I'm going to go to school tomorrow. Well, I'm not, but you all are. And, I'm going to hang out with friends. I'm going to go from class to class. Like, what does this idea of God being slow to anger, how does that impact me on a daily basis? I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, I think first off, like with what you said, it should really inform us around like what we think about God, because if I were to answer the question like what's one of your favorite things about who God is, a lot of times I answer that question, I say like his patience. And I think like his patience really comes back to this idea of him being, slow to anger, because I don't know about you, but throughout my life, like I've needed a God who's going to be patient with me because I'm not perfect, because I'm going to be the one who is saying like, all right, God, that was the last time. And then I'm going to come back and raise my hand at church the next weekend, like you guys know what I'm talking about. But there's this side of just like, man, you want people to be patient with you because you know that you're a work in progress, because hey, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to learn, how to do this thing. Like it is really, really difficult to grow. It's really difficult to be someone who lives with a security in who you are and all that when you feel like someone is not going to be patient with you, when they're just constantly like, why can't you get it together? This is, the like millionth time. Like, why can't you just hurry up? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your sister or whatever? But God is so patient with us that like, no matter how much we stumble and fumble, like God is going to continue to be the one who is just there going like, hey, I'm not angry with you. I'm not mad at you. I'm not looking for a reason to bring about some like calamity in your life because you're not walking this thing out perfect because you went to summer camp and you're not worshiping me like you did up there. Like, God is not that God. Like, God is the God who is patient with us. And he's the reason why we're able to continue to just over time grow in our faith, why we're able to just continue to come back to him and receive grace and receive forgiveness for all the things that we need that grace and forgiveness for. Is because I know that God's heart towards me is a heart of love, grace, and he's patient with me. He's not angry with me. He's patient. I think it should inform you there, because walking around believing that God is mad at you or that God is just waiting for you to mess up is not going to help you to follow him. It's not going to help you to be someone who's living with this peace in what it means to be his child. You need to know that he's patient with you. And so I think that it speaks to us there, but I also think it speaks to the way that we should carry ourselves as well. That if this is how God is, then this is how we desire to be as well. How many of you are really patient with other people? There are times where for us, I think, we can be really quick to anger, or we could be even in the room today and maybe we're carrying around a little bit of bitterness towards someone, or maybe we're holding a grudge because of something someone did to us and they haven't really, asked for forgiveness. They haven't, come around and tried to seek to make things cool or whatever. Like, there can be times where for us, we're actually struggling in this area of anger and how we actually respond to that. And I think for us, it informs us there as well, where it's like, you know what? God's patient with me. And so that should help me to be patient with others. And God can actually give me the ability to be more patient with others. Some of you, it might even be in that area of your relationship with your family. Like, God can help you in that way to not be so quick to anger, but to be someone who is more self-controlled when it comes to this, and more ready to forgive, more ready to extend grace, because man, that's how God is with me. I'm the recipient of his grace, not the recipient of his anger. And so other people get to benefit from that when we actually believe this to be true about God as well.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a theme that we're starting to highlight, right? So it's like, hey, as we discover who God is slow to anger. Okay, what does that actually have to do with me? Well, the direct implication is how we treat other people. Making that direct connection between, okay, that's who God is. Now, how does that affect how I treat other people? And in this instance, we go, okay, well, God, you're slow to anger. You're full of patience. You're actually quick to forgive and quick to give grace, and that's your disposition. So then that's how it affects how I treat other people. Is the next time somebody wrongs me, the next time somebody puts a restriction on me, the next time somebody threatens me or something that I care about, like a parent taking a phone away, everything inside of us that wants to go, oh my gosh, like I just want to rage out and I want to let all of this frustration out on somebody else. Well, wait a second. I am following, and I was created by someone who is actually slow to anger. And one of the ways that I now participate in the mission of him reaching more people is by becoming someone who is also quick to forgive. You probably can't overestimate, how much of an impact it is when you're able to look at somebody, whether it's a friend who has wronged you or, a situation where you were not treated right, and you're able to go, you know what? It wasn't right, but I'm going to try to be quick to forgive. The picture that you end up painting of God is exactly what he is. Wow, okay, if this Christian is quick to forgive and slow to anger, how much more must God be? And basically, the point that I'm trying to highlight is, as we discover more and more, this is who God is, the direct implication and application for us is, okay, and this is how I now treat other people as a result of that. And in the very first message, we looked at Moses when God tells Moses, hey, here's how you're going to find out about me. You're going to obey me and you're going to you're going to obey me and you're going to help other people. And we said this month, we want to try that. Because apparently God says, hey, when you try to help other people, you find out more about who I am. And when you go out of your way and you say, hey, Mom, can you just take me to the store? Can you take me to Target so that I can get a couple of supplies so that we can actually, so that I can give them to young people who are my age who have nothing close to what I have? In that simple process where you go, I'm going to give a little bit of what I have, and I'm going to kind of stretch myself beyond what feels comfortable or what feels natural. I'm going to go out of my way to help somebody else. God says, when you do that, you actually find out more about me. You actually discover more of who I am and more of what I've created you to do. And when we talk about God's anger or him being slow to anger, this is just another facet of that, of us going, okay, God, that's who you are. The next time you have an opportunity to forgive someone, try to do it as quick as you can. The next time you have an opportunity to get mad and to get angry and to lash out, try to practice being slow to anger. And in that process, take notes. What am I learning about God? What is God showing me in this moment? For all you know, the thing you learned might just be that I couldn't do it because I got too angry, I got too upset, so I just let him have it. And all of a sudden, though, you know, okay, God, I'm not you. I do not have the patience that you have. How amazing is it that you have that type of patience with me? Can you help me? Can you show me what I need to do to become more like you? But it's as we actually try to take what we're learning and we apply it to the relationships that we have with our parents, with our friends, with our family, we discover, okay, that's actually who God is. And that's also a part of who he's making and forming us to be. So it's a little bit of a weird subject. It's something that we don't talk a lot about, but I wanted to talk about it because it's an attribute of God. It's something that God displays, and I think it's one of those things where it can be really easy to either think he's more angry than he actually is, or to just ignore it and not try to understand it at all. But on Wednesday, we're going to unpack with our small groups a little bit more of just what this means for us and what it means for the relationships that we have with people and how we treat other people. So that's a plug to show up on Wednesdays as well.